Thank you very much, Mark, for this kind introduction. So my name is Aigerim Raimzhanova again. I'm a PhD student with the ICD, a program which is also in collaboration with the University of Bucharest. So I've already presented a few papers at the ICD conferences, and usually they were very academic and related to my PhD research. Today I decided to talk about my home country for the first time in the framework of ICD and introduce some of Kazakhstan's economic and political priorities. As we know, economic development goals are highly interrelated and codependent on the foreign policy strategies. So the aim of the short presentation today, the aims are first to overview the trends in foreign policy of Kazakhstan. Then I want to evaluate the state's hard and soft power resources. And finally, to introduce education as a smart power resource. So short facts about my country. The Republic of Kazakhstan is a country in Central Asia with a minor part west of the Ural River, so a little bit in Europe also. Kazakhstan is the world's largest landlocked country and the 9th largest country in the world with a territory of 2.7 million square kilometers. The state has land borders with the following countries: Russia, China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. The state has gained independence and sovereignty in 1991 following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Population is currently 18 million people, which is comprised of 131 ethnicities. The political capital is Astana, while the financial and cultural capital of the country is the city of Almaty. So this is just to give you an idea of where the country is located geographically. And now towards foreign policy. So Kazakhstan's foreign policy is heavily dependent on geopolitics. Central Asia has traditionally been the geopolitical center stage of 19th century imperial rivalry between Britain and Russia. The disintegration of the Soviet Union has changed the geopolitical realities. However, the centrality of Central Asia did not diminish in the so-called the new great game, though it changed its dimension. Three factors play an important role in initiating the new phase of the great game in Central Asia. First is the fact that the landlocked geographical location of the states means that they need a well-developed land routes to have access to other countries, and we've seen this in the map. Second is the closeness of the region to the important world powers such as Russia and China. And finally, the states are rich in energy resources such as natural gas and oil, which makes them of high interest to other world powers. So the new great game for Kazakhstan incorporates the following key actors: Russia, China, and the West in the face of Europe and the USA. Moscow proclaims Kazakhstan a zone of vital interest, both economically and politically, illustrated in the pushing of the creation of the Eurasian Union, among other things. Beijing, meanwhile, seduces the country with economic prospects and offers grand infrastructural projects. In fact, as of now, China has vastly outstripped Russian investment in the country. Ultimately, Kazakhstan's relations with China could not be at the expense of their relations with Russia and vice versa. So stuck between these two great powers, Kazakhstani government seek a third way in the face of collaborations with Europe and the USA. Which is illustrated in a number of trade cooperations, non-proliferation projects, and other. In the face of the geopolitical context, Kazakhstan posits its foreign policy as multi-vector, which implies simultaneous co-alignment with different great powers to preserve the country's sovereignty, independence of values, and to prevent the domination of one power on the territory. The multi-vector policy explains the adaptive strategies and policies of Central Asian nations versus the geopolitical pluralism introduced by the intersecting economic, political, and cultural interests of the great powers. And also it allows for maneuverability in the international community. So in terms of foreign policy goals, multi-vectorism is guided by two overarching concerns for Kazakh state security and economic development. So, an example of multi-vectorism could be traced in Kazakhstan's participation in multiple cooperation agreements and organizations, such as the UN, the UNESCO, OSCE, Commonwealth of Independent States, WTO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and many others. For instance, the country was a charter member of the Shanghai Five, which later expanded to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that provides a forum for close cooperation with both Russia and China on security policies. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan also actively engages with NATO through the Partnership for Peace program and participates in US military education program. Kazakhstan is also the founding member of the Conference for Interaction and Confidence in Asia and engages in regional security dialogue with Asian Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The election of Kazakhstan to head the Organization for Security and Cooperation, first among the ex-Soviet states, in 2010, is considered one of the latest achievements via multi-vectorism that increased the country's status on the international stage. So, multi-vector policy in international relations is part of the theories of alignment, from purposes of balancing to bandwagoning. However, apart from co-alignment and self-preservation purposes, an argument could be made for the potentiality of states like Kazakhstan to balance world power. Parakana described a second world comprised of states that, unlike superpowers such as China, USA, and Europe, cannot set the rules, but can hold balance of power between major players. As an example, one can look at Kazakhstan's stance during the recent Crimean crisis. Although many expected the country to automatically side with Russia, the country held its own in terms of the importance of sovereignty. So in multiple frameworks or multiple forums, the state has emphasized the integral part of sovereignty to the country's independence, thus opposing Russia's actions. So also, Kazakhstan was the moderator for one of the first talks post the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, which was held in London. So this is an example of how they can mediate among the global powers. In fact, Kazakhstan's economic success and foreign policy clout are often underestimated, while its dependence on Russia is often exaggerated. So now I want to look at the country in terms of its hard and soft power resources. Traditional hard power resources, as we know, includes geography, resources, military, population, and economic strength. So in terms of nuclear power, Kazakhstan has relinquished all of the nuclear power in 1990s to open the doors to the West. In terms of resources, Kazakhstan boasts the world's 9th largest petroleum reserves and is most successful among ex-Soviet states. Abundant natural resources led and sustained a rapid economic development. However, this also creates problems with high resource dependency of the economy on resources, which has negatively influenced the whole country in the recent devaluation crisis in Kazakhstan. Geographically, the country is arguably the most strategic country in Central Asia. Although being landlocked and suffering from being landlocked, Kazakhstan's vast area in the heart of Eurasia means that any communication or transit corridors linking Russia or Eastern Europe with Southern and Eastern Asia must cross the country's territory. So in terms of soft power outlook, by relinquishing nuclear power, Kazakhstan automatically turns to soft power. According to the Foreign Affairs Minister, whom I interviewed recently for my empirical research, soft power is a new vision that the country is in the process of adopting and developing. Soft power resources in Kazakhstan are numerous. Its history, culture, nature, tourism industry, the sports sector, which includes boxing, cycle racing, track, etc. However, there's currently a lack of systemic and sustainable promotion efforts. The implementation of the initiatives is a gradual and slow process, and as of now, there's no single United Nation branding campaign. Kazakhstan is also host to a number of international events, including the upcoming World Expo in 2017, the Universiade, Asian Winter Games, and many others. Obviously, hosting these events is considered sexy. However, there's a question of them not becoming an expensive one-time acts without the sustainable effects. In view of the high dependency on resources and the only gradual development of soft power in the country, in my research I emphasized the need to invest in the educational sector. Education is one of the most effective and efficient sources of soft power. For instance, one can only look at the UK and USA's educational systems or their Fulbright and Erasmus exchange programs. Erasmus is the European one. Furthermore, apart from contributing to soft power, there's an argument that education can also affect hard power resources, such as economic strength, through the proliferation of human capital. Multiple scholars have found positive correlations between education and economic growth, among them Becker, Barrow, Mankin, Romer and Whale, Kruger and Lindahl, and many others. The implication of this perspective is that investment in knowledge brings economic returns, both individually and collectively. According to Sapari and Johansson, education and training remain implicit cornerstones of national economic competitiveness, despite being explicitly marginalized as independent variables in the dominant models of competitiveness. However, it's important to note that the relationship between education and development is not simple or linear. For instance, Barrow and Aguinar argue that simultaneous investments in human capital, infrastructure, and health allow achieving better results. There are critiques of this model. However, and I'm going to say this in short, the discrepancies in the results could be attributed to the different estimation parameters and employed variables. I did actually a paper on this separately in one of the other conferences. But generally, there is evidence of a positive correlation between human capital investments and economic development. So in terms of Kazakhstan, referring back to my PhD research, there's evidence that international educational programs and institutions are key drivers of change and innovation in the educational sector. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Senate leader for the Committee of International Relations, whom I also interviewed recently, both agreed that the creation of a modern and international educational system is a key to the creation of human capital and sustainable development. However, the research also illustrates that in order for the spillover effects to spread on all of the educational sector and not only on the private international one, further multi-level support of both state and private sector are imperative. So overall, Kazakhstan's role as a regional leader in Central Asia and as an influential player in global geopolitics is steadily expanding. In particular, the country's multi-vector strategy allows it to balance its interests among the great powers and pursue its own interests. However, in the light of the complex geopolitical framework that is constantly changing and the general instability of global politics and economics, the country cannot rely anymore only on its rich natural resources, and therefore the focus needs to be shifted from strict economic interests towards sustainable soft power initiatives, and specifically in the sphere of education. In effect, education has the potentiality to become a smart power resources, giving appropriate instruments and framework. Thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm ready to take them.
Thank you very much, Aika, too. So, please, the floor is yours for questions and comments, please.
Thank you. Due to the ethnic and religious components of the Kazakhstan popularity, does the conflict or competition between Russia, China, the Western world affect or the loyalty or try to attract like special kind of group of ethnic groups to support the Chinese effect or investment rather than the others? Because that happened in Iraq. Sorry for asking. Yeah.
No problem. First of all, as in terms of ethnicities, Kazakhstan has, as I mentioned, over 130. However, since the Soviet times, they've been living peacefully among each other. And the government is trying to push currently the national idea of the Kazakhstani identity, not only separately Kazakh, Russian, Korean, Ukrainian, etc. I would not say that there's a certain ethnic groups that side with a certain great power, at least not, it might be superficially, but it's not a general trend. However, generally, I think the fact that Kazakhstanis are by their culture nomadic, so it's not like Uzbekistan, which has a settled civilization of thousands of years. Kazakhstan in this way is more open to the West. It adopted the Washington Consensus, so a neoliberal economic agenda in the 90s. The question, of course, is how much of that they implemented, but generally there's this trend. So the country is supportive of this multi-vector strategy. So if they like having nice brotherly relationships with Russia and China, which is illustrated in how many students go for education, both in Russia and China, but also very much the West. So Kazakhstans are culturally very welcoming, but also in terms of all the institutions, they are trying to adopt this kind of trilingual way of thinking and to implement that in their policies. So currently it has been working for them because they are able to choose. For instance, say if one of their great powers offers Kazakhstan a new oil pipeline or some grand infrastructural project, that in effect it's attractive for Kazakhstan, but not attractive to another global player, say Russia, who doesn't want Kazakhstan to have this agreement with China. So this way, Kazakhstan is able to choose, and Russia, in order to not let Kazakhstan sign that agreement, say it would improve its current policies or their cooperation agreements. So in the end, Kazakhstan would not lose, but only win from this multi-vector policy. But I think it's important to realize that, of course, it's not enough to just rely on the economic side, because right now the multi-vectorism is primarily in terms of economic agreements, but to really push forward the way for soft power and specifically education. Because Kazakhstan could potentially be a hub for education in that sector in the Central Asian area, which is already doing, but obviously not doing enough as it could. So thank you for your question. I hope I answered it.
Thank you.
Great. So if we could all maybe express our sincere gratitude to Aika for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.